Welcome to week 3 of Bible Studies for Life. We're in the spring of 2025, Gospel of John, looking at the signs of Jesus that are recorded through the Gospel of John. Today we're on the third sign. We've had the first 2, so that makes this number 3, right? Makes sense. All right, I'm glad you're watching. I really appreciate you doing that. If you haven't already, subscribe, like, hit the thumbs up button, share a comment, tell us where you're watching from, ask your questions, share the video with somebody else. And if you want to support our work, you can go to give.exposedtochrist.com and do that. We're going to dive right into John chapter 5. After this, a Jewish festival took place, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. By the sheep gate in Jerusalem, there is a pool called Bethesda in Aramaic, which has 5 colonnades. Within these lay a large number of the disabled, blind, lame, and paralyzed. Okay. We've been in Galilee, we've been in Cana, now we're in Jerusalem. So Jesus is traveling around different places, right? Word about him is spreading as he is doing these miracles, right? He goes to, and it's interesting, right? He calls it, he's very specific here. John says it was the sheep gate, right? It's this pool called Bethesda. It's a pool called Bethesda. It has the 5 colonnades, so he's being very descriptive because, as I've said before, Christianity is based in history. These are actual events that occurred. So this is an actual event that occurred, right? And there are all these disabled people that are laying there. Now, okay, you need to get prepared for this. We're skipping verse 4, right? We go from verse 3 to verse 5, and you may not even notice it when you're reading in your Bible, but it goes from verse 3 to verse 5. There is a verse 4 in there that is not in the most reliable manuscripts. It talks about the kind of the myth around this pool that an angel would come and stir the water, and whoever got into the water first would be healed. Okay, a little bit of a fable around the pool that went. Okay, we'll see that come up here in a minute. So we go on to verse 5. If you're uncomfortable with the idea that there are some passages in, say, the King James Version that aren't in the oldest manuscripts, it's because in the hundreds of years since the King James was written, we discovered more ancient, older, more closer to the original manuscripts. We don't have any originals, but closer to the originals that don't include that verse. You'll see the same thing about John chapter 8, 1 through 11, actually 7:53 to 8:11. You see the same thing at the end of Mark 16, several different places. Okay, so you can study up on that if you want. I wouldn't dive into that too much in my study unless there was somebody that just had a bee in their bonnet. But the deal is, you need to settle in your mind, settle in your heart, that those people that have worked hard to do biblical translations are being faithful to what can be understood as the closest to the original manuscripts that we can get. That's what we want. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. One man was there who had been disabled for 38 years. 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and realized he'd already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to get well?" I'll just stop right there. This is a good question. Do you want to get better? Do you want to be healed? Do you want to get out of your hole? Do you want to get out of the trouble that you're in? Or are you content just being in the middle of it? Are you really ready to do what has to be done to get out? Now, obviously, this man's disabled. There's a whole thing going there, but it is a valid question, isn't it? Sometimes we find ourselves in trouble all the time, over and over and over again. And we've got family members and friends that are in trouble over and over and over again. And it is a valid question to ask, to challenge. Do you want to get well? Do you want to get out of this? Good question. Okay. "Sir," the disabled man answered, "I have no one to put me into the pool when water is stirred up, but while I'm coming, someone goes down ahead of me." So this is that whole legend fable about the water stirring, and whoever gets there says, so in essence, he's saying, yes, I just can't get there in time, and this is the only way I see out of what I've got, right? "Get up," Jesus told him. "Pick up your mat and walk." Jesus just says, get up. Last week, right, he said, your son's going to be fine. Go home. Here he just tells the man, just get up, pick up your mat and walk. Now, generally we would say if a person has lost the use of their legs for 38 years, then the biggest problem that they have at that point is that muscle atrophy, right? That your muscles have faded away out of lack of use, so that the healing is not just in whatever condition led you to not be able to use your legs, but that your legs have now become useless completely because they have no muscle strength in them. And you've lost the ability to balance yourself. And yet Jesus tells him, you get up and pick up your mat and walk, perform the actions of a person who's totally normal at 40 years of age, basically. Instantly, the man got well, picked up his mat, and started to walk. In that instantly. Now remember where we are, right? We're around this pool, right? And there are a large number of the disabled, blind, lame, and paralyzed all around the pool. Okay? And he goes to this one man and says, you want to get well? He says, I do. I just can't get there. He says, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. And so he does immediately this obedience, right? Instant obedience, which says that he trusted what Jesus, and somewhat like the first two miracles, the desperation. If Jesus doesn't do something, well, then nothing's going to happen. And when Jesus makes that promise, I might as well follow, all right? I might as well do what he says. Now, here's where the kicker to the story comes. Now, that day was the Sabbath. And so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, this is the Sabbath. The law prohibits you from picking up your mat. Now, this is beautiful, right? This man was paralyzed. And their deal is, hey, you can't be picking up your mat on the Sabbath, bud. What are you doing? You're not supposed to do that work. They had literally hundreds of rules about what it meant to rest on the day of rest. They described how far you could walk, what you could do. Well, one thing that you couldn't do was carry something. It's certainly not your mat. You couldn't carry that. You can't carry your mattress around. That's against the rules on the Sabbath. And so they're upset that he picked up his mat. They seem to have missed what happened, right? He replied, well, the man who made me well told me, pick up your mat and walk. Now, I love this. The man who made me well told me, pick up your mat. You see, there was this guy that healed me from being paralyzed for the last 40 years. So I just kind of do what he says instead of what you say, because you guys hadn't done anything for me. Y'all haven't helped me at all. And none of you have come around to tell me to get up and walk on the day that wasn't the Sabbath. But the guy that did tell me, I just did what he said. I love that, right? You know, I'm just gonna listen to the guy that healed me instead of the guy that had all the rules. Instead of the guy that tried to make all the rules about, you know, what was right and wrong and good and bad. I'll listen to the guy that actually did the good. That's who I'm going to pay attention to. All right, I got to move quickly here. Jesus responded to them. Okay, so there's a confrontation. Look, we've skipped. We went from verse 11 to verse 17. Read what's in between. They confront Jesus about this, and Jesus responds to them, my Father is still working, and I am working also. Okay, he says my Father. Now, they get really mad. This is why the Jews began trying all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal to God. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he thinks he's God. Now, there are people that claim all kinds of stuff that Jesus never said. But we're just saying that everybody in the first century, the religious leaders, all understood very clearly what Jesus was saying. He was making himself equal to God. They all knew that very clearly. Their problem was not that Jesus was making himself equal to God. Their problem was that he was equal to God. That it wasn't the words, it wasn't that bad messaging. It was they didn't like what he said. They didn't like the claim in and of itself. I mean, blasphemous, whatever. On the Sabbath, it was the fact that it was true. They were not going to follow him. They'd already decided that. They weren't trying to get him to change his message. They wanted him to not be who he was. Just, real quick, when Jesus says, the disciples say, teach us how to pray, and he says, you pray like this, our Father, when he said that, when he says this, my Father, you see here, right? That is revolutionary. A good first century Jew would never call God Father. In fact, I don't think a 21st century Jew would ever call God Father. But that's what Jesus says. This is how you pray, our Father. Jesus answered them. He doubles down. I love this. Truly I tell you, the Son is not able to do anything on his own, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, the Son likewise does these things. For the Father loves the Son and shows him everything he is doing, and he will show him greater works than these, so that you will be amazed. He comes here a couple of more times, right, with the Father. 3 more, calling himself, I am the Son, right, 3 times. There's so much in here. If you haven't done Experiencing God with Henry Blackaby, you need to get that study and do that study to talk about this, because that is a big part of this passage, is a big part of what he says. But basically, Jesus sees what the Father's doing, and he gets involved in it, and so should we. When you see God at work, get involved. That's where God's working. Get involved. Be a part of it. That's where we want to be, right? And God will do great works, and we just get to enjoy it. We get to be a part of it, and that's what Jesus says. I see the Father at work, and I get involved. That's where I go, where he's already working. God is already at work all around you. Find out, figure out where he's at work, and become a part of it. All right? Hey, there's so much more we could talk about here, but our time's up. Thanks for watching. Appreciate you doing that. Be sure and subscribe, like, comment, share with somebody else. See you next time.